It sounds like a paradox, right? How can total chaos lead to beautiful art? Well, that's exactly what we're going to dive into today. How centuries of political turmoil in ancient China led two poets to look for answers in the natural world. And in doing so, they created two completely different paths for poetry, paths that would eventually come together and shape a literary tradition for 1,000 years. Just try to picture it. A world in constant upheaval, dynasties rising and falling at a breakneck speed. For the educated class, a career in public service, which used to be the highest calling, had become this incredibly dangerous game. Faced with chaos and disillusionment, many of the best and brightest minds of the era, well, they just walked away. But this wasn't just about escaping. When they turned their attention from the madness of the courts to the calm of the countryside, they discovered something profound. Nature didn't have to be just wallpaper for human drama anymore. It could be the main event. And that radical idea, that shift in focus, gave birth to two totally new and powerful kinds of poetry. All right, so to really get this poetry, we first have to understand the world it came from. We're talking about a time called the Six Dynasties period, a long, messy, but really transformative era in Chinese history. So yeah, this period stretched for over 350 years, and the one word to describe it is instability. A huge turning point was the fall of the Western Jin court in the early 4th century. This event sent a flood of the northern elite migrating south, and they found themselves in a completely new environment, a place that was lush, mountainous, and wild. This landscape became the raw material for their art. And while all this was happening, a major intellectual shift was underway. A philosophy called abstruse learning, which had its roots in Daoist thought, really took hold among the elite. It basically said that withdrawing from the messy world of politics to find inner peace was the noble thing to do. This created the perfect philosophical climate for these disillusioned scholars to find not just a safe haven, but real meaning in nature. And this brings us to our two main characters. In the late 4th and early 5th centuries, two poets, and what's wild is that they were working completely independently of each other, took this whole cultural mood of retreat and just crystallized it. They forged it into two brand new and very, very different types of nature poetry. And man, were they different. You can see it right here. On one hand, you have Tao Qian. He came from a minor elite family, got totally fed up with official life, and basically said, "I'm out," and became a farmer. His work started what we call farmstead poetry. Then, on the other hand, you've got Xiling Yun, a totally different story. He was from this hugely powerful aristocratic family. For him, withdrawal wasn't a choice, it was political exile. He became the father of landscape poetry. So let's dive into our first poet, Tao Qian, and his really unique personal take on rustic life. Now, what he was doing was so revolutionary in its simplicity that his peers, who were used to really elaborate poetry, kind of just dismissed it at first. Tao's poetry was, for his time, shockingly simple. He used plain, direct words to talk about his everyday life on the farm. He wrote about the simple joys, wine, reading, but he was also honest about the hard parts like poverty and backbreaking work. For him, being a recluse wasn't about a physical place. It was a state of mind. His style was so straightforward that critics condescendingly called it the words of a mere farmer. This famous couplet is amazing because it captures his entire philosophy. See, he isn't on some quest for a beautiful view. He's just going about his day plucking flowers, and he happens to see the mountain. The original language for catch sight of even implies a spontaneous, accidental glance, not a purposeful stare. And that's his whole idea in a nutshell. The most profound connection you have with nature happens in these quiet, effortless, sudden moments. So, if you remember one thing about Tao Qian, it's this. His poetry was introspective. It was all internal. He wasn't trying to paint a picture of a grand scene for you. He was trying to capture the feeling of being in that scene. The deepest meaning was found in the landscape inside his own mind. Okay, now let's switch gears completely and turn to our second poet, Xiling Yun, who took a totally different path. If Tao Qian's world was his quiet garden, Xiling Yun's was the untamed epic wilderness. Xi's poetry is the polar opposite of Tao's. We're talking ornate, complex, highly crafted language. He wrote about his adventurous hikes through wild, mountainous places. For him, nature wasn't just a place to live, it was a grand subject for aesthetic appreciation, a canvas for deep philosophical thought, and even a path to enlightenment. And take a look at these famous lines. They seem simple, but don't be fooled. This is pure, deliberate craft. The subtle way he describes things, the perfect balance, it all creates this vivid, almost magical scene of spring arriving. This wasn't a spontaneous glance. This was a master craftsman at work, intentionally capturing a perfect moment of beauty. So for Shi Lingyan, nature was this magnificent thing outside of himself. It was a grand spectacle to be explored, even conquered, both physically, on his ambitious treks, and intellectually, through his complex and philosophical poetry. So here's where it all comes together. You have these two incredibly different traditions, one intimate and simple, the other epic and complex. But they didn't stay on separate tracks forever. In fact, their starting so far apart is what makes what happens next so powerful. Tao Qian and Shi Lingyan laid down the two foundational tracks. And for the next few centuries, poets tended to pick a lane. You were either Team Tao or Team Xie. But then came the Tang Dynasty, the golden age of Chinese poetry, and a new generation of masters started to think, hey, why not both? They began to blend the deep personal feeling of Tao Qian with the grand descriptive artistry of Shi Lingyan. And that powerful combination is what created the perfected form of classical Chinese nature poetry that we know today. It's like the quiet stream from the farmstead and the powerful torrent from the landscape merged into a single mighty literary river that has flowed through literature ever since. And it's all thanks to two poets who found something truly timeless by turning their backs on a chaotic world.